Hello again everybody, so today I'm back and today I'm going to be doing my wrap up for the month of May and my TBR for the month of June. So I'm really struggling not to just be outside right now. It is literally about 1 billion degrees. I want to get my sunburn on, so I'm going to make this quite a quick video, fingers crossed, even though that never happens with me, and get to enjoying the sunshine, and hopefully you've got that where you are too. So this month has been kind of a mixed one for me. I've read a decent amount, but it's been quite a busy month again, and I have been naughty. I'm sorry. There's a few books which again I said I was going to read, which I've put off and not ended up reading. I got distracted by new shiny things, which I'm sure we can all appreciate. I'm a little bit of a child in my head. But basically I'll show you what I've read for the past month and what my plans are for the next month, and let me know what you guys think. So we're going to start off with the most difficult book for me to judge from the month of May, and that's The Novice by Taryn Matheru. So basically I got attracted to this because the boy on the front cover is doing magic, has a bow and arrow and has a demon. That's basically what the inside of my head is like. So as soon as I saw it I was like, right, I'm going to give this a read. And the world it creates and the creatures and the characters are all brilliant. It uses a lot of the kind of fantasy archetypes, like it's got dwarves and elves and conflict with orcs and magic and summoning and really interesting stuff. And I absolutely love that, and of all the books I've read, this is the one I've most wanted to be in for quite a long time. I could be that person, I could do that. I'd be less badass, but I could do it. But basically, the thing that really put me off about this book, that really stopped me loving it, was the writing just isn't up to scratch. The dialogue especially just feels really stunted, and it's just not easy to read. It really jars you away from being so caught up in the world because it is just so stunted and so unpleasant to read. I got used to it as time went on, and the first few pages I really struggled with. And I don't think it's something to stop you reading the book. Just don't read this if you're expecting a wonderfully written book. Read this if you like a good setting, a good fantasy story, but just don't expect it to be blowing you away with the way it's written, because it is a little bit disappointing on that front. Still, I gave it 8 out of 10 overall. Moving on to the fiction that I've read this month then, I read The Loney by Andrew Michael Hurley. So I've been looking at this for a long time, and basically I've been wanting something a little bit gothic, a little bit different, a little bit interesting, and this sounds exactly like that. It's set on one of the north coasts of England, and it's just a really moody, atmospheric book that touches a lot of religion, and it touches a lot of kind of questions of the unknown and a lot of relationships between families, and it's really interesting. It's a really unusual plot, and actually with this kind of thing I normally hate when a book doesn't give you the answers. Now this book doesn't give you any answers really at all. It leaves a lot open to your interpretation, and I didn't mind. I thought I would, but actually I could deal with it reasonably well, and it didn't detract from how much I enjoyed the novel. It's really well written. I just kind of felt it didn't do as much as it could have done, and a few more answers would have been nice. I gave it a 7 out of 10. So the book that inspired me to read The Loney is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, which I've just reread for possibly the 3rd time. In the beautiful, beautiful covers. Look how pretty they are! But basically this is one of my favourite books. I studied it at school, which normally ruins it for most people, but for whatever reason this has stuck with me as one of my favourites, and decided it was time to give it a reread. It's just so good. Like, a lot of stuff I noticed this time I never noticed in the past. Different nuances to characters. For example, I didn't dislike some characters as much as I had previously, and I liked others more than I thought I would. And I actually hated both Cathy and Heathcliff this time, which is rare. I've always remembered quite liking them both, but no, I hate them both. And if you haven't read this book, you need to read this book. It's probably my favourite classic. In fact, it's definitely my favourite classic by quite a long way. The characters are really well done. It's still really readable today, and it just captures the mood of a place so much better than basically any other book I've read. You feel like you are in the Yorkshire Moors. Now granted, where I live I'm not actually far from the Yorkshire Moors, so that probably helps. But still, it is just so, you get so caught up in it. It's incredible. I gave it a 9 out of 10. While we're on the classics train, I also read The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. So anyone watching the channel for a while will know I do like my fantasy and my science fiction, and it's something that I read quite a lot, quite regularly, and I've never read any of the kind of classic science fiction books. Decided with these nice editions I'd give it a go. And actually, I had never realised how much of an inspiration The Time Machine was for basically every work of science fiction ever done. There's all the things that it covers in terms of time travel and alternate futures and different races. Like the Morlocks mentioned in this are inspiration for so many creatures throughout science fiction. And it's just such a cleverly done book. It's really thin, doesn't take long to read it all, still really readable, and overall it's just really enjoyable. I would happily read another 5 or 6 versions of this book dealing with different futures that the author visits, and you know, just the different things that you could encounter with the basic concept of this book. If you like sci-fi, give it a read. It'll literally take you a couple of hours one afternoon, and it's just really enjoyable. I gave it 8 out of 10. The last fiction I read this month then is one which I've talked about a lot on Twitter and on the channel in the past few weeks, called The Countenance Divine. Now this is a beautiful book. This is why I picked this. Like, it came in at work, picked it up, never heard about it before, had no idea what it was about, saw the cover and thought I am reading that, and started it literally pretty much there and then. It's kind of a weird historically set novel, and it's partly set in 1666, 1777, 1888 and 1999, and for literally 95% of the novel you have no idea how they fit together. It follows John Milton, the poet who wrote Paradise Lost, William Blake, another poet, Jack the Ripper, and an IT guy in 1999. It's a weird cast. And it's just basically following their lives, and it's just really unusual. Literally, I was very nearly the end and I still had no idea what was going on. Naturally, having finished it, I do still feel like it's not the clearest. It's not that it leaves things ambiguous, it just feels like there's gaps it doesn't fill in that it really should do, and that was a disappointment. The way it's written is generally quite good. The Jack the Ripper things especially are kind of written in almost like London vernacular, with dropping vowels here and there and misspellings to kind of fit the character that it's portraying, and it's just really, really interestingly done. I was disappointed by the fact it didn't really come together very well, but I just thought it was really interesting, and my god, is it beautiful. I gave this a 7 out of 10. Next up then is the non-fiction I read, and we started off with Europe In or Out by David Charter. So basically anyone living in the UK at the minute knows that we've got a bit crazy about this EU referendum, which is looming. It's literally, I think it's 2 weeks today, in fact, at the time of recording this, and it's just been basically to clue me in and inform me on my decision I'm making. And the book is very well written. It's really easy to read, really easy to follow, but still quite detailed at the same time. It really gives you a good overview. It is maybe not as impartial as it suggests, but interestingly, in the introduction, the author talks about the fact that he's very much in the camp of leave the EU, that he's kind of a bit sceptical about it. But all the way through it does feel like the things he writes are a bit biased towards staying. Now I don't know whether that's just the way I've looked at it or whether that is how it reads, but it was interesting that it wasn't as impartial as expected, but in the opposite way than you'd think. But it was good to clue me in on the issues, and I feel like I've got a better basis now than I did before. I gave it a 7 out of 10. The next one I read was The Last Act of Love by Kathy Retzenbrink. Now this is a sad book. I have to say, it's about a girl whose brother gets hit by a car when he's 19, and he basically never recovers. He's basically entirely paralysed, he goes into numerous comas, and it's just about the way her and her family deal with it and the effect it had on her. Now it is very sad, I did cry a couple of times, but actually what makes it really good is it's got quite a dark sense of humour to it. The way it finishes is really quite uplifting, and it doesn't feel like a really depressing book. It is an interesting journey to go on. It's really well written. Kathy Retzenbrink's an amazing writer. Really a real great pleasure to read. And I'd been umming and ahhing about whether I wanted to read this, but I am very glad I did. I gave that an 8 out of 10. Now the last one is a Naughty Joe moment. This is a book that I actually stopped reading. So I'll tell you what it is first. It's Reality is Broken by Jane Professor McGonagall. Yeah, that's her. It's just a lot more academic than I expected. I love books about video games and the theory behind it and the way it affects people. This just wasn't fun to read. It felt like a chore. It was really quite academic. It didn't do that much to link it back to games. It was very, very disjointing. It didn't seem... The book inside isn't what the cover seems to suggest, and that was a real disappointment for me. I gave it up about 120 pages or so in, and I can definitely tell you I won't go back to it. It's just not what I was expecting. It's not a book I'd read. So they're the books that I read in the month of May. Now let me show you what I'm going to be reading in the month of June. So the first 2 books are ones which I've previously talked about, in fact, 2 months in a row as books I was going to read and never got round to. This month, I promise I'm really going to try. I can't guarantee anything because I'm a bit useless, but I'm hoping I'll get around to reading these too. So that's video game music, which I have read half of. I'm just in the process of kind of dripping in and out of it. And Battle Mage by Stephen Aryan. So they are going to get read this month, I promise, and I won't show my face again until I've read them. That's not true. Pretend I didn't say that bit, but I am going to do my best, I promise. So for the non-fiction, I've got a really broad variety this month. I'm going to be reading Living on the Volcano, which is a book about football managers, and essentially each chapter follows one football manager and the way they go about their job, the way they got to where they are, the lessons they've learned and what they're trying to do going into the future. And it's just a really interesting perspective. You get to see across the whole range from the Premier League right down to the British Football League, and it's just a really interesting book and I'm excited to give it a go. Some characters I know about, some I don't, and I think it'll be interesting. Kind of an interesting insight to that role and how it is to actually be a football manager. And then next up is one that I have talked about quite a lot on this channel in the past few weeks especially, and that's Straight Jacket by Matthew Todd, who's the editor of Attitude magazine, and it's basically about the links between being on the LGBT spectrum and depression and mental health issues and the way they fit together and what can be done for an individual person and on a society level to kind of deal with those issues. So it's one that I'm really intrigued about. It's got a lot of good reviews, a lot of good hype about it, and I'm excited to give it a read and see what it says. So following on from last month's classics binge, I read 2, which is more than I've read in the past 12 years, so that's good going. I'm going to be reading another 2, and they're going to be The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. After really enjoying The Time Machine, I'm intrigued to read more of his sci-fi and see what kind of how those influences are still quite obvious in sci-fi nowadays. I'm excited to read that. And Alice in Wonderland, because I realise I've never actually read Alice in Wonderland. I've seen numerous films, TV shows, etc., but I've never read the book, and I'm desperate to give it a go, especially with the film again coming out in the next few weeks or so. I just can't wait to see what it's like as a book. The next 2 are ones I talked about in my last book haul. The first is I Saw a Man by Owen Shears, which has been described. I'm very pleased to say that my description of it last time seems to have proven right. It is kind of a literary thriller, so it's kind of a little bit more detail, a little bit more dense to it. It's not quite as superficial as a lot of other thrillers can be, and it's just one I'm looking forward to getting my teeth into. I think it'll give me a real psychological runaround, which I think I'm looking forward to, but we'll see what my state of mind is like when I finish the book. I'm just intrigued to see what it's like, and I've not read a thriller in ages, so it should be a good one to read. The other is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. So the other day I completely lied about this book and said it had won the Arthur C. Clarke Award. That's not what it's won. It's won the Nebula Award, but it has been nominated for a few other things as well, and it's just basically a really interesting piece of fantasy writing that kind of draws on a lot of the tropes of fantasy fiction and kind of fairy tales and twists them a little bit into something completely new. Literally sounds incredible. I cannot wait to get started on this. The cover is beautiful and really gives you an indication of what it's going to be like, and as somebody who likes fantasy, I always like something that kind of plays with the things you'd expect from a fantasy book, and this sounds like it does just that. So the last one then is the one that I am by far the most excited about. I hadn't heard about this book until a few days ago, got a free copy from a publisher, but having read a bit about it, it is so up my street. It's called Laurus, or Laurus, depending on how you want to say it, and essentially it's I believe a Russian novel that's been translated, but basically it's about a 15th century plague healer working in Russia who goes on a journey throughout medieval Europe, essentially, and it combines all my favourite things. It's got the medical aspect of working as a plague healer, it's got the historical aspect of being set historically, that was a great sentence, Joe, and it's got that kind of journey adventure element, which I also really like. It sounds quite quirky, and it just genuinely seems like I am going to love this book. I'm getting into it with such high expectations, and I'm really hoping it lives up to it, because it genuinely sounds like it could be one of my favourite books for quite a long time. So the last one then is the one that I am by far the most excited about. I hadn't heard about this book until a few days ago, got a free copy from a publisher, but having read a bit about it, it is so up my street. It's called Laurus, or Laurus, depending on how you want to say it, and essentially it's I believe a Russian novel that's been translated, but basically it's about a 15th century plague healer working in Russia who goes on a journey throughout medieval Europe, essentially, and it combines all my favourite things. It's got the medical aspect of working as a plague healer, it's got the historical aspect of being set historically. That was a great sentence, Joe. And it's got that kind of journey adventure element, which I also really like. It sounds quite quirky. It just genuinely seems like I am going to love this book. I'm getting into it with such high expectations, and I'm really hoping it lives up to it, because it genuinely sounds like it could be one of my favourite books for quite a long time. Three, two, one. So, there we have it. That's my TBR, not very well held, for the month of June. There's 8 books, I believe there. 9 books, good counting. And basically they're all just ones that I cannot wait to read. I think they're going to be brilliant between them all. It's a good mixture, and I can't wait to get cracking. So there we have it. That's my wrap-up and TBR. Not quite as short as I originally hoped it would be, but still. I'm really excited to get reading on those books, and I'm really intrigued to see what you guys think. There's a few books there that I bet people will never have heard of before, and I'm intrigued to see what you guys think about those. But also, if you've got any suggestions or recommendations, or you've read any of them, let me know what you think down below. It's really appreciated. I'm going to be back in the next couple of days or so with my 500 subscriber thank you. I think I've come up with something quite interesting to do for that, so I'm really hoping to see you guys all there. But other than that, a like and subscribe and a comment and all those things is incredible, and I'll see you soon with my next video.